Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and you're watching another episode of Overbooked, the series where I talk about every single book on my shelf because nobody tells me what to do. Today I am talking about Song of the Crimson Flower by Julie C. Dow. Ba-ba-da-ba-ba-ba-ba. There you go. Some quick disclaimers before we start. This is a book that I bought myself, nobody's paying me to talk about books, and I am going to keep things spoiler free. This does kind of follow on from Forest of a Thousand Lanterns. You might be vaguely spoiled for that and its sequel, but not really. Up to you. Down to your discretion. If you're super keen on Forest of a Thousand Lanterns and you really don't want to know anything about it, I would maybe click away. I hummed and hard about this one. Ummed and ard? Ummed and ard feels right. I think it's that. Should I have included this book in the previous episode where I talked about Forest of a Thousand Lanterns, but then I didn't talk about the sequel to A Forest of a Thousand Lanterns because I don't own that? Where does this fit? It's sort of a companion book. It stands alone. What do I do? They do take place in the same world, and this book does follow on from the events of the previous books in that series, but I think this book is distinct enough and stands on its own and is doing its own thing enough that it warranted its own video. This is a Vietnamese-inspired original fairy tale / folklore YA fantasy romance book. Oh, that was a lot of keywords, that originally came out in 2019. As I mentioned last week, Julie C. Dow is a Vietnamese-American author who currently lives in New England. Her latest series started in 2020 and it is called... The first book is called The Mirror Broken, which I have not yet read, but I must check out. Song of the Crimson Flower starts with our main character Lan, who has been assuming that every night her future fiancé, a very wealthy man from the town, has been boating past her window and giving her flowers and reading her poetry and being generally very lovely. When she finds out that it is not in fact her fiancé and it is in fact instead I've got it written down somewhere here, the distinctly non-noble physician's assistant Bao, who is trying to cover up for the fact that her fiancé has actually jilted her, she's understandably not that pleased. Bao is devastated and runs away only to fall afoul of a local witch. As we all do, she traps his soul in a magical flute, again, a normal story of everyday folk, and says that only love will set him free. So they set off on a great adventure that will take them far beyond anything they ever imagined, all the way up to the highest echelons of society, and yeah, there's some romance along the way. I think that this is a really good companion novel. I think that's the word I was looking for. Companion novel. I've been doing some thinking about what makes a good companion novel or extra novel in a series that is not related to the previous characters, and conversely what makes one bad. And I think what I really enjoy is a chance to check in on characters from previous books when they are not the main characters. I think Robin Hobb does this really, really well, in that you'll sometimes get snippets of other series. If you read her whole work, you'll realise, oh, okay, this is all interconnected and I can see how that person's doing, and you get to see them grow up and that kind of thing. In this case, I think that line of how much information is too much information, how much am I actually wanting to write a new story with different characters, and how much do I want to just be writing my old books again, I think that line is walked really well. There's a couple of threads that get tied off from the original duology, but for the most part it's this new story that gets to shine. So if you liked the original books, you'll probably enjoy some of the where are they now aspects of this story, but also I think you could read this on its own and it would still make sense. That might be in part because the original duology is kind of a fairy tale retelling, so the story is understandable. Even if you don't know specifically which character is which, you can get the sense of this is what happened. This is a very sweet romance, which is good if that's what you enjoy. If you're looking for something different, if you're burned out on romance or YA or a combination of the two, I can see how that wouldn't be what you wanted. So don't read this unless that is what you want. I personally really enjoy a YA fantasy romance when the time is right and when it's written well. One thing I thought this book did well is it tackled the boundaries between the two characters. Quite often in romance, but in YA romance in particular, I find it very hard to believe that a character would forgive another for something they have done. In this case, I think it's heavily suggested, and we do see on the page, that the work is put in order to gain forgiveness on both sides, and I think there is that element of both of them are a bit in the wrong. So there's a lot of forgiveness that happens, but also a lot of work put in to earn that forgiveness, which is what I like in a redemption story. That's not to say there aren't those lovely moments of tension that we all know and love. I'm just saying this isn't that kind of YA romance where it goes from you broke into my bedroom to kill me to oh, I'm going to marry you and have 1,000 babies in 30 pages. Though the romance is definitely the focus of this book, I think there is a very good story behind that element. There's a good story rooting this whole thing. I thought the antagonist worked really well, and I certainly kept interested in the non-romance aspects of the book for the whole thing, which is impressive, because usually with YA fantasy romance I'll be like, either I very much care about the plot and I'm annoyed by the romance, or I very much care about the romance and the plot is kind of eh. I think that might be in part because this book isn't very long, it clocks in at under 300 pages, but hey, that's also a selling point. Not every book has to be a tome. This story does exactly what it needs to do, and there isn't loads of extraneous detail. Some aspects of this book are very fairy tale-y, and that might be a selling point, that might be a con for you. I think that if you like the way that fairy tales work, the way that those stories are told, and the familiar beats of those stories, you will enjoy this. If that's something where you're a bit fed up with that, maybe I wouldn't go down that route for this book. If that's something that you're a bit more burned out on, or that's not something you enjoy, I would say give this one a miss. I also think this isn't as strong as Forest of a Thousand Londons, and I know that in that video, which if you haven't watched it, this will make no sense, but I talked a bit about how that book was a bit disappointing on a reread. I haven't reread this since I first read it, so I'm not sure if the same could be said for this, but I think that Forest of a Thousand Lanterns just has a little bit more bite to it, and the romance is obviously not the centre of it. So the book's doing very different things. My personal preference is going to be woman gains power as opposed to woman falls in love. Some quick comparisons. Obviously, I think you should probably read Forest of a Thousand Lanterns if you enjoyed this. It's a good shout. If you've already read it, then you'll know. I also thought about YA fantasy romance that I have recently reviewed. Raw by Cora Carmack is also in this series of Overbooked, and that's very well worth reading. I would waft at you, but the microphone will come off. It'll be a faff. And I also thought, again, I bring it up with YA fantasy romance quite often, but I really do enjoy that series. Girls of Paper and Fire is another really good one that just does YA fantasy romance in the way that I really enjoy it. And it's gay, so what can I say? As with a lot of YA fantasy that is on these shelves, as I'm discovering as I film these videos, I think you would enjoy this if this is the kind of thing you enjoy, which is a stupid statement and kind of pointless when I think about it. But YA fantasy and YA fantasy romance are some things that I don't recommend to everyone in the world, because I'm fully aware that some people just really don't like them. I personally think that this is a YA series that you can read as an adult fantasy reader and still enjoy, but you have to read it as a YA fantasy romance because it's such a specific thing. I don't think you need to have read Julie C. Dow's other books in this world, but it can't hurt. And yeah, there's a magical flute, and I used to play the flute, so I appreciate that on a lot of levels. I think that's everything I wanted to say on this one. Comment below if you have any other YA fantasy romance that really hits the spot for you, and what is your favourite thing about that? You know, is it the tropiness? What do you like? Do you like a YA fantasy romance that pushes against those tropes? I'm interested to know. Comment all of those things. While you're down there commenting, please do subscribe. It makes me feel loved and appreciated. You can also follow all of my social media if that's what you're interested in as well. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one. There's gonna be some bloopers now. It's all fine. Well, even if you don't know specifically who character, I think that might be in part thank you.